But I was
Yeah, sorry about that.
no worries. With this this time difference between you and I, I was willing to stay up late if I get to talk to you. Mainly because when it comes to the subject that we're talking about, you're probably one of the few opinions that I value. Outside of stuff that I've already read. In terms of academia.
Thank you.
So I know you don't like doing self introductions, so I will do it for you. But
Okay.
but before we make that move, I have heard multiple pronunciations of your last name. So would you prefer I call you Dr. Alaric, or is it?
Uh, Look, it doesn't really matter. Anything is fine. Like at the moment, anything that remotely resembles my name, I just go, yeah, that must be me.
But the most common one I've heard is Naude, as your last name.
Yeah, Nord is the French way and Nordia is the English way, but it doesn't matter. I
So I'll just
I
say
really
Doc.
don't care. Yeah.
I'll just
Just
say
hey
I'll say
you. Hey you is cursing.
I'll say Dr. Nod, so we both save each other
All right.
some uncomfortable conversations. So yeah, it's good to finally speak to you in person. I know I don't want to take up all of your time because obviously this could be a very long conversation in the long run, but I want to
Yeah.
try and at least keep it to the major talking points here.
Okay.
You were one of the first people I've seen in academia when it comes to the subject of Yasuke that was saying, wait a minute, this is one of those things where most of what's being spoken and what's being perpetuated on the internet isn't exactly factual
No.
versus what we know is true, which I don't think either one of us would dispute the fact that Yasuke was a real person.
No,
Um,
definitely. He was real,
but
but
what
that's about as much as we know about him. He was real. He worked for Nobunaga for a short time, who was under the care of Nobunaga for a short time. Depends on how you look at it. And that's about what we know. He was
right,
treated probably nicer than what the Jesuits treated him,
right, and that I think that's one of my
which isn't
contentions.
hard, actually. It's not a high bar.
That was one of my contentions with the fact that most of what we know about Yasuke came from the Jesuits, who are the
Right.
ones who not essentially, who actually introduced him to Japan. And when you look at history from that time period, I think it would be safe to say that the Jesuits themselves were sort of doing a little bit of embellishing on certain
Yeah,
things.
more than a little bit sometimes. Yeah. Are we recording now? We
Yes,
are we
sir.
live?
Yep, we are
Okay, okay.
live now.
Just checking. All
Yes,
right.
sir.
Can't say anything incriminating.
I would not expect you to. I'm going to refrain from asking you anything that might jeopardize your career here.
I know nothing about those bodies.
But I'm glad to see, and you and I spoke about this, how I came across a Google thread of academics that were saying, well, yeah, we don't really know that much about Yasuke, but at the same time, we don't want to speak up in the unfortunate event that we get, you know, roped in with the racists and everybody else
Right, right.
that are
And actually,
complaining.
there's a few academics on that thread that I actually really respect, and one or two of them have actually written articles. I won't say who, but they've actually written articles and have been critiquing certain books by Lockley and saying, well, there's actually no record of this, or how does he jump from point A to B? Now, mind you, in any kind of research, especially historic, you kind of do have to jump points, but you have to do it in a kind of coherent manner, and there has to be a strong kind of surrounding supporting evidence if you don't have any direct evidence. But there's a lot of problems with the whole like Yasuke was a linguistic genius thing. Firstly, it takes at least 3,000 hours of serious, like dedicated study to learn Japanese to a fairly okay spoken level. That's a lot of hours. And that's not what I'm saying. That's what the various language institutions have come together and they've got all the data and they put it all together and they say, well, it takes about 3,600 hours of like dedicated study to learn modern Japanese. That's not even, I'm not sure if you saw the video that I did
I
on
did.
the reaction. Yeah. It wasn't like there was one uniform language at the time. Yeah. And mind you, Europe was like that too at the time. Like there was standardized languages that people used in the court, but if you went around different parts of Europe, the Spanish in different places was different. It still is, frankly. Yeah, they have
Hmm.
they have standards now that the government says is a standard, but in actual fact, it's quite different. Even Dutch, there's so many dialects of Dutch, and from one city to another, it's quite different. Like even the words we use. Sometimes I will say something and they're like, "What is that word?" It's like, "Oh, we say it like this." It's like, "Okay, that's weird." Yeah.
Yeah, very very similar in my case. Growing up in a Hispanic household, my grandmother's from Mexico, my grandfather's from Colombia, and even then, my grandmother would say words in Spanish that my grandfather would be like, "No, that's not how you say that word," you know. And I apologize. I know I brought up the self introductions part, and I was going to save you from it, and I never actually did it. Uh, so for anybody that goes back to watch this, Dr. Naude actually lives in Korea, has lived in Korea for 15 years, I
Yeah, around
believe.
about
Yep.
that. Yeah.
And you are currently a linguistics professor.
Yes.
So I would assume that if anybody knows about languages and is familiar with translations, it would be you.
Well, look, I'm not even I don't even think that I'm the best one out there. There's lots of way more talented people than me, frankly. Yeah, with natural skill. I just enjoy it. That's why I do it. But yeah, there are some people with way better skills than me, and that's I'm kind of just someone who's come into it because I saw all the mistakes being made, and I thought, oh, that's wrong, and no one's saying anything. Uh,
Well, one thing I
it's a lot
noticed
of
that
it's a lot of effort, though. It's kind of a lot of very draining effort. So there's uh, there's a Chinese expression they say, 招摇一张嘴，辟谣抛短腿. It means to spread a rumor, you need to open your mouth, but to fix a rumor, you have to run around till your legs are broken. So
I'd say
uh,
that's an accurate saying.
yeah, so there's so many mistakes that have piled up, and people take it for granted. Yeah. Like even in that even in that reaction video I made, I spoke about the Bodhisattva Buddhas,
Hmm.
the curls being snails, and then I thought again because that was told to me by a Thai Buddhist in Thailand. That's why they're curly. Okay, so I took it on face value, and then I looked it up, and it's actually not a canonical uh, teaching in Buddhism. It's kind of a Buddhist folktale that started in Nepal and spread across and is quite popular in Thailand, and that's why Thai people just assume that it's true because it just spread like that. So I took it on face value because it came from a Buddhist, and yeah, it is a folk tale, but it's not a canonical tale. So that's quite interesting. Even the Utah Museum of Fine Arts, they even have it in their description of some of the statues.
Oh wow.
So it's quite interesting. Yeah. So it's not like it's an unknown one. But even then, it's not actually a proper teaching, but people assume. So I think that kind of thing happens very easily. And with the Yasuke issue, it's happened, yeah, quite easily because I mean it's an interesting story, frankly. What Lockley made was an interesting story. It sounds interesting, so people would be interested. I was interested to tell you the truth. Yeah, I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I took it on face value, and it's only when I kind of dug down that I saw, okay, that's not exactly what happened.
So so looking at the history of Yasuke, at least from what I've found on my own research, is that in total, everything that we know about him can be summed up in about a paragraph in terms
pretty
of
much.
what's floating out there that would be considered factual, quote unquote.
Yeah, yeah, the Ietada diary and the Nobunaga Chronicles. But like I've pointed out in my research, it's only the Sonkei Kakubon that actually has any mention of sword or stipend. Actually, not sword, scabbard. It's a decorated scabbard. It's not even a sword necessarily. Sometimes they were empty. Sometimes they had like just a decorative blade. And I don't know, you know seem to know with your blade collection that if you use a mall, some nice sword that you bought in a mall as a display thing, and you
Yeah,
try to take that out to battle with someone with a real sword, it's going to last about half a second
yeah.
and not going to be much protection, to be honest.
One thing I've learned in my efforts of being a Nihonto collector is that there are very many fakes out there of people that will
Yeah,
sell you a bill of goods for something that is not what it is.
yeah.
And
And some of them are really good fakes too.
oh yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah, very much
So,
so. Needless to say, I made a very expensive mistake when I first started collecting.
okay, fair enough. Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of this, and you brought up Lockley, is that a lot of this could have been avoided if it had been said from the start that a lot of this is speculation or just personal opinion of things rather than it being presented as a fact
Right.
and then running with it.
I have no problem with that. If someone wants to
Right.
speculate this happened, that happened, that's fine. It's part of the intellectual exercise. But then to say, well, this must have happened. Well, now you're crossing over to the line where it's no longer acceptable because we don't know. Even in my book, I said, look, he could have been a slave. He might have been a free man. I give several options that could be possible, but I don't really say this definitely happened because I don't know. I wasn't there. Unless you haven't noticed, I'm not 400 years old. So um, I I give the options of what's possible, and I think, and I'm not even technically a historian. I'm just a linguist, but my field overlaps with history, which I find funny. My critics are saying, "Well, you're not a historian." No, but I have to read old stuff, so I have to know the surrounding context to be able to do that.
And
You
even
can't
then,
just read an old document without knowing what was happening at the time.
and that's what I was going to bring up is the fact that when you look at these documents, I would trust a linguistics professor to be able to accurately translate something versus somebody kind of take. And I've seen multiple translations of what you're referencing with Yasuke, and who better to say, hey, no, that's not what this says than someone like yourself that studies linguistics. And
Right.
and that's one of those things. Even from a historian point of view, why would I trust the historian who is focused in a different area of study versus the person that can sit there and look at what's written down and what we have, and then make an educated translation based on that.
And
So
sometimes, it's not even that easy that you can just sit down and read a text and know what it says. You have to go line by line through. Some of the writing styles are not very easy to read. Some of the handwriting styles, they flow, and some writers have their own idiosyncrasies. Like Ietada is quite actually his work is quite interesting because it's a diary, and sometimes it seems like he forgets the kanji halfway through, and then he's like, "Oh crap, how do I spell this word?" And so he just goes to the kata and he just writes katakana instead for the pronunciation because he doesn't want to write the wrong place name or something like that. So it's quite interesting. Like when he refers to Yasuke having black skin, he uses the word sumi, but he doesn't use the Chinese character, the kanji for it. So we don't know, does he mean ink or does he mean coal? Because they're both sumi, but the character is different. He just wrote the sound. So he's like, oh, how do I spell? Oh, whatever. Okay, sumi. Of course, that's what it seems like is happening in the writing. Yeah, we can't say that's what happened, but it seems like that's what happening when he's writing down. So it's quite interesting to look at the writing, and you can kind of tell a little bit about the person and you know what kind of mindset they were in. Was is the writing really rushed? Are the strokes really like kind of rigid? Are they fluid? You can tell about someone's education maybe if there's someone that learn later on, or if there's someone that's from a richer, noble household, they have more kind of refined writing styles. So it's quite interesting to look at the documents, and sometimes it takes time to do that. And
So,
there are people that are extremely skilled, and they can just look at it and know exactly. But for others, obviously, and depending on the document, it can take time to read.
right, and I know that that tends to happen, especially with with historical translations. When people find stuff,
Right.
it's not exactly uncommon, at least for those of us that study history. Uh, and to give you kind of a personal story that goes along with that, you and I both know Tomoe-san on X.
Yes.
I showed him a picture of a World War II postcard from a Japanese officer. Of course, it's handwritten, and he looked at it and he goes, "Man, this is some old cursive style Japanese handwriting. I'm gonna need like a whole bunch of people to help me." And it took multiple people that he knows to kind of put together the entire translation of what was on that postcard, and it ended up being at least interesting to me because I like Japanese history among other things.
Okay.
And it was from an officer to another officer regarding a battle that had just happened and two casualties that they had. So it
Okay.
was, and I get what you're saying with that. That goes perfectly with the example that I just gave you.
Like, there was a
Of
cat cameo.
yeah, yeah, of somebody who is native, who knows the language, who knows the writing, and then looking at said writing and going, "Wait a minute, there's a lot of weird stuff going on here that I don't know." You know?
Right. I mean, even English handwriting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Some people have atrocious handwriting, and then you have to go back and if someone has a nice, clean cursive script, then it's great. But sometimes it's not like that. So yeah, unfortunately, you can't always get 100% idea also from some text. It could be that character, it could be another character. Um, and then you also have the problem where, especially as so maybe I should start from the beginning. So the Korean dynasty called Baekje, they were very close to Goguryeo, and they're actually like a daughter state, and they had very close relationships with Wagoku, which is ancient Japan, Kyushu area. And so they had a long relationship, and the Japanese are like, well, we keep getting trade stuff from you via you from China, but we really want to be in direct contact with China. So through that way, the Japanese were introduced to the Tang court, who were not very nice. So that's why the Japanese the character, the Chinese character for Wa is not a very flattering character. Uh, I don't know if you know this, but the person that met them was trying to insult them. So when he wrote the country name, he was making fun of their stature, and he basically called it dwarf country.
no, I didn't know that.
So yes, so the original character is quite derogatory that he used. And anyway, it was via Baekje that Chinese characters kind of came to Japan. But it seems like the literati there, they were already familiar with it through Korea because they had relationships with Korea. And it seemed like there was some kind of mutual intelligibility between the languages at that time. We're talking a very long time ago now, right? So 6th, 7th century. Um, and as a result, the a lot of the Chinese characters that came into and influenced Japan heavily was from Tang Dynasty. So they still use a lot of characters that are kind of not used in Korea and uh, China anymore because there's been a bit of a shift. Some of the meanings have shifted as well. So when you read a document, it's kind of good to know which period the document is from because even the kanji, sometimes the actual meaning of the character can change. Uh, and within cultures, it can change too. They start using it in their own way. And by Sengoku period, they were using a kind of very formalized style of classical Chinese called kanbun,
Hmm.
which in Korea we call hanmun, which we still use in Korea to a lesser extent now, though. Uh, so that's why I can kind of read Sengoku period stuff easier than I can read Edo period stuff. Because
Yeah,
Japanese for me is mostly a literary language. My speaking is not that good. Yeah. So it's all it's all book stuff. Yeah, which sounds weird, but if you don't have exposure to lots of speaking, that's what happens. Yeah.
yeah, and I've kind of run into that myself doing my own research with some of the things that I have that vary from Showa era to Edo period, and there's some adjustments that need to be made whenever something is
Right.
signed or whenever something has any sort of signature or something attached to it. In which case you sit there and you're like, well, this more resembles a traditional Chinese versus modern Japanese, and that's where, at least on my end, because I'm not an expert, things get a little bit hairy.
Right.
But
Yeah.
fortunately, I've met a few people in that circle that have been able to help me with translations, which I'm working on that myself. I figured if I'm going to collect something from a certain place, I should probably learn what it is I'm collecting.
Right.
But
So for when I was reconstructing the Tada
mhm.
diary, some of the characters there, he was writing still in a very classical style. So on the Japanese keyboard, it was like this character doesn't show up. So I had to remove it, change the keyboard to uh actually I think I didn't use a keyboard. I used manual input on my phone. And I changed it to classical Chinese and then I could write the actual character because it kept changing it to the kanji simplified version where half of it's missing. So that kind of thing happens a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is that there is it's very easy to say something and state it as fact, especially nowadays on the internet, right? And then
Right.
it'll take off like wildfire, even though it's not factual. And when it comes to this, especially the topic of Yasuke, right? I don't think there's a problem with people creating their own stories and creating games or anime or anything that involves Yasuke. But when you get out into the weeds of it, when you're saying, okay, yeah, this is great as a fictionalization, it doesn't really fit into the history, right? And there's
Right.
no separation between the two. Uh, when you look at something like Afro Samurai is fantastic, but that's not factual, historically factual. And I think
Well,
people have,
it was funny that people have been claiming that Afro Samurai is based on Yasuke, and then the other day the actual animator of Afro Samurai said, "No, I didn't even know about him when I wrote this. I just thought it would be cool to have an African samurai, so I did it." It's like
you
the
know,
man himself is telling you that he didn't. So, but there'll still be people that say, "No, no, it's based on him."
yeah, and exactly, and and I know you were running into that whenever you were especially talking about it, where you were saying, no, that does not say this, and the person was like, yes, it does. Yes, it does. I saw it over here. This person said it. That's exactly what it says. And you were sitting there going, no, that is not what that says. It doesn't say
Uh,
that
I think
anywhere.
I think the post was I think that post got hammered because
Oh,
I
yeah.
pointed out that it says, yeah, right. He was claiming that it says samurai, and then he claimed it says bushi, and there's like it's not in the text anywhere, so I'm
Yeah.
not sure where you're getting this from. No, it says it. I asked AI, so it must be true. Oh, oh
And I,
dear.
and I think that's where we run into the other part of this equation that I wanted to bring up with you is the fact that nowadays anybody can generate an image on Grok or on ChatGPT or any other sort of AI program and
Right.
create a old photograph looking AI picture, and you see, I hate to say this, but you see it all over Facebook of people sharing AI generated images going, oh, see, here's the Black Samurai from prior to Yasuke. See, they were already there. Yasuke wasn't the first. They were already there. And then so on and so forth. And you see it done with not just black folks in Japan, but all over the place of this historical revisionism that's being done via AI and people taking it as gospel, which is
It's disturbing actually.
it's scary to me. It's extremely scary to me, especially how quickly people are to believe it
Yeah.
without without knowing the actual history of anything that they're even looking at.
And sometimes, the picture quality is so poor, and I just wonder how can they not see that this is an AI generated image? That's what's more that's what more disconcerting to me. They don't have the ability to tell the difference. Now, some AI pictures are very good, but the ones that I've seen of the Black Samurai stuff are not particularly convincing pictures.
Well, I've seen some good ones.
Yeah.
I've seen some good ones, and I've seen some people that will run with it till the wheels fall off. You know.
The other one that I've seen is the oxidized photos that they use,
Mm-hmm.
old black and white oxidized photos that deteriorate obviously over time. So a person's face becomes darker. And then they're saying, well, this proves that Koreans were all black. This is the newest thing,
Yeah,
apparently. Yeah.
that's one of the other things that I've seen is also with Korea. Yeah,
It's like the really funny thing is they make the claim that the aristocratic class, Yangban, were black people, and my wife's grandfather was one of those people with the hat and the beard and everything, and he was very light skinned actually because Yangban tend to be light skinned because they don't go outdoors.
oh, well,
They stay inside writing. Asia, especially, the light skin thing is a class based uh class based case, not a an ethnic base. So a lot of Western people they try to think of everything in kind of racial terms because that's what they're used to. But in East Asia, it's well, if you've got dark skin, it's probably that you've got dark skin because you've been working in the sun.
in the sun. Yeah,
And therefore you're from a lower socioeconomic caste. And if you have really light skin, well, it means you must come from kind of a privileged upper class, and that's where the light and dark skin things comes from. Here, it has nothing to do with any sort of ethnicity. And people try to keep sticking that on, but it doesn't work that way. Yeah.
and that was also another conversation that I had with Tomoe-san was the fact of when you look at all these things that are happening on the internet, most of it is from a Western perspective of race and
Right.
skin color and everything else that is slowly being pushed to countries like Japan and Korea, China, etc. And it's not the same because there's that dynamic does not exist, at least in the amount that it does here versus historically in Japan and Korea, right?
Right, right.
You know,
Look, I mean, there are racist people everywhere.
oh yeah,
That's a given thing. Unfortunately, it exists everywhere. It's a global problem. But this particular thing doesn't really have anything to do with race. Yeah. But like you said, I think there's this push for some kind of Western narrative to be spread in Asia, and I've seen it a lot too with disparaging Asian men. Oh, Asian men are bad for this reason, for that reason. These countries are so like unsafe, blah 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 blah. And then you look at the violent crime statistics, you look at rape statistics, and East Asia is the lowest out of any region pretty much compared to, you know, Africa or you don't even need to go that far. You can just go to America and look at
Yeah.
the homicide rate there compared to Korea. It's more than 100 times on the level of the population. So yeah, we don't have guns here, so that's probably
That helps.
a major
That
factor.
definitely helps. But everything that we've talked about, and I've spoken to multiple mutual people that we know, and it seems like it's the centrist, as I like to call it, position that nobody has any issue with skin color when it comes to fiction, right? And nobody cares if you want to create a black samurai or a white samurai or whatever. If you're putting it in a fictionalized setting, the example I used was the video game Rise of the Ronin, right? Which is set late Edo period, pre-industrialization, meeting with the West. And in that game, you can have any color that you want. You can have a white samurai, black samurai, doesn't matter. And nobody made a big deal about it because even though that game is set during an actual historical period, uses actual historical characters, people that
They didn't claim
existed.
our game is 100% authentic.
Correct. And
Right.
it's not essentially, stating that your character is historical, but basically making your character a part
Yeah,
of
yeah.
history where you're not really influencing it because regardless of what you do is what actually happened over there.
Right,
So
right.
so that was especially my biggest problem with what Ubisoft did with this Assassin's Creed Shadows thing was how they said they were consulting experts and they wanted everything to be as accurate as possible. And then all this stuff popped up and you look at the experts that they consulted for this game and you're like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. I was told if I don't have anything nice to say, I shouldn't say it. So I'll go with I'll go with that. I mean, even the tatami mats were square. I've never seen a square tatami mat in my life. They're
They're-
rectangular. If you've ever been to Japan, you would see when you go to a house and you stay there that their mats are very much not square because they're designed to sleep on as well. So it's like,
Right.
okay. Um,
But,
yeah.
it's
Like
very
the most basic things is you're not aiming very high here, right? I mean,
yeah. And I think that's where this whole situation and where this whole argument, kind of gains legs is because the people that were saying, "Hey, this is wrong. Hey, this isn't right. Hey, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't put this here, whatever," is not because they were doing it from a perspective of, "Oh, I just don't like black people." It was, "No, if you want to respect the culture as all these people are saying you should do, then why does that fly out the window in this instance? When people are telling you, hey, this is culturally
right,
insensitive, this didn't happen, you shouldn't do this," but all of a sudden people are fine with it, even though people are just trying to be appreciative and to be sensitive to the setting and to the
right.
culture that it actually
I mean,
represents.
the thing is that there's a lot of people that cry cultural appropriation for everything, but as soon as they do something that's quite seriously cultural appropriation, then suddenly it's all right. It's quite a bad double standard. Uh, So that's what disconcerts me the most, I think, is that the double standard and the using the race card for everything when it's not a racial issue. You know, to be honest, the first time I heard about Yasuke, and I just believed Lockley, actually. Yeah. I've said this many times. I believed the whole Black Samurai Yasuke thing when I first saw it because it's plausible. There's been lots of samurai from different countries, actually mostly Korea and China before him. Um, but I didn't know the details of the story, so I guess that's why I didn't I didn't really nothing really clicked. Whereas you see, most of the people that became samurai in Japanese history that were from a different country were, for example, a Chinese, very high level Chinese lieutenant who was an exceptional fighter who was captured. And then he's like, well, I have nothing to go back to. So then he served whatever lord he was under. He was already trained for many, many years as a soldier, very skilled person. So, he could take those skills and continue on. With Yasuke, we don't know where he's from. And the Portuguese were not very fond of training slaves. Yeah? This is not what I'm saying. This is a recorded
Yep.
fact. They like to use mercenaries whenever they could. They really didn't like to arm their slaves because they already saw what happened with Muslim empires that made massive slave armies, and then those slave armies decided, hang on, we outnumber you.
Yep.
Didn't go so well for their masters after that. um, so yeah, I think there's a disconnect between some of the things, and if we look also at the Koreans, there's several Koreans that became samurai, and some of them were actually kidnapped as kids. The majority, they were taken from wealthy households, or they found boys that looked, kind of tough,
Hmm.
and they trained them for many years, and the ones that survived, they they ended up serving whatever lord, and they got given Japanese names and all that. So uh, that took years of training as well. It's not like there's like, hey kid, have a sword, you're a samurai
Right.
now. All the processes, got to learn the language because the samurai is also expected to act as at least a lieutenant type person on the field, give orders um, to the footmen because it's a kind of a management position. And then you have um, later samurai like Jan Houston, who was a guy from the Netherlands, but they were more kind of a how should I say it, uh, administrative samurai. So they were samurai in name, but they weren't really the battle type. Like they probably had armor and all this kind of stuff, but their main purpose wasn't battle, it was advisory. I don't think they would last a very long time against a highly skilled, actual
Yep.
Japanese samurai. Fighting style is different than that. But to keep them on and to kind of keep them around, give them a title, make it all official like that. So I can't see how someone spends a year and a half somewhere and becomes a weapons expert, especially with Japanese weapons, which are very kind of, for a Korean, I could understand because they have a similar style. Uh, they could probably pick it up quite quickly if they had like focused training and they were already a soldier. Chinese as well, because they have similar types of sabers, but yeah, a Western saber is a very different kind of, the wrist, everything is
Hmm.
quite different. So yeah, it's not a plausible theory after actually looking into it, even just from a physical point of view.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was because this this conversation always gets very heated among people on the internet, right? But when I look at this entire situation, and I would imagine it's the same way that you do, I look at this from a historical perspective. I don't want to talk about what I saw on Reddit or what I saw on Facebook or any of that. When I talk about stuff like this, I want to talk about the facts. I want to talk about what we know. And
Which is not much.
exactly. And even then, not just the stuff that we know, but the stuff that people are saying versus what's actually written down and is what would be considered factual, if that makes any
Right.
sense to you. It's I don't like all this speculation and people arguing over stuff that they think is real or might not be real or whatever. Yeah, I don't care about any of that. What do we have in front of us? What can I sit down and if I wanted to go over there and read it myself, what exists. And I think if more people did that, then a lot of this would be boiled down to a less of an argument than it is. But
Right.
you know, a
I
lot of
think
it comes to
people
emotion. Emotion.
people don't know how to have an argument, or not an argument, a kind of a discussion where they can agree to disagree. Everything is insults and that kind of thing, and it's easy to get like that, to be honest. But yeah, there's very little nuance, and there's a lot of people that believe things heart and soul without knowing what they're talking about.
Yep.
Like recently, what's his name? Mr. Webb and Mr. Muscle. Yeah, they're true believers, but it doesn't really matter because that's not what it says. Yeah, so it's become like a quasi-religious at this point,
Yeah.
and that's when people get more and more fanatic because it's no longer about right or wrong. It's now my belief that needs to be protected.
Well, I would go even as far as saying it's more about winning than losing
Right.
over
Look,
anything.
if tomorrow they find a Sengoku period document written by, let's say they find Nobunaga's diary, that would be amazing. And in there it says, oh, there's this guy Yasuke, and I made him a samurai. Blah blah. I will change my mind tomorrow. It doesn't matter to me. Like I can say I was wrong, not a problem, because you have to adjust with the information you have. But with the information we have now, then no, he wasn't, because we just don't have enough information to say that. And claims like he was Hatamoto, come on, if he was Hatamoto, he would be written everywhere. And anyway, that was something that was happening in Edo, not Sengoku. So, you know, there would be records everywhere. It would be a major thing.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. I'm in the same position where if there was more information and we had something saying, "Hey, this is what he was, this is what he did, this is where he lived, so on and so forth." Cool. All right. We got something in writing. We know it's a fact.
Right.
But you know, people like to take liberties with facts, and then you get where we are now. And one of the things I wanted to bring up with you is that a lot of people like using the Last Samurai movie as kind of a gotcha for all this, right? Where they're going, oh, well, nobody had a problem with Tom Cruise being the white samurai that saved Japan or whatever. Well,
But he wasn't a
that's not
samurai,
what that
wasn't he?
movie was. You know, it had nothing to do with that. And if you dig deeper into that, I believe that movie was based on Jules Brunet,
Okay.
where I don't even think that, and I could be entirely wrong about this, I don't even think that Jules Brunet was technically a samurai. I know he won some medals, and I know that he fought in a couple battles, but I personally, I don't think I've ever seen anything saying that Jules Brunet was a samurai. And
Mm.
if that, like I said, if I'm wrong, I would happily take that back. But
Yeah, and I think many people are of that mind. You know, if there's some obvious information that says he wasn't, or that he was, then you know they're happy
yeah,
to go. The
yeah,
the problem is that the only information we have now, it doesn't say that he was a samurai. That's what people are assuming it says, because he was given a place to stay. And I've gone over it, that the word that they use for a place to stay is accommodation or house, but it's a very generic term. Servants also have those. The stipend is also a means of living, which is also a very normal thing to be given to servants. And a scabbard is just like a gift. And he gave that kind of thing to sumo wrestlers. So
yeah,
are we saying that every sumo wrestler is now also a samurai? Or being given a knife makes you samurai? Then every housewife in all of feudal Japan was then a samurai, because it's like, and the other problem is they say, well, the samurai system was more fluid in Sengoku. Yes, it was more fluid. There was more upward mobility, but that was based on meritocracy. It's not like, oh, well, you want to be a samurai? Okay. It took Hideyoshi 10 years, 10 years of battling, 10 years of head bowing, 10 years of moving shoes around to get to the point where he was like, okay, now you can have this family name and you can have the rank of samurai. Like it took 10 years of service. So he had to survive through multiple battles to get to the point where he could do that. And you want to tell me that a foreigner just rocks up to Japan and is like, hey, you can be a samurai. There would be Nobunaga would be murdered in his sleep. I tell you, it would not have gone well. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize these daimyo, they were very powerful people, but they were also very scared half the time because they had to balance out who is on their side, who is not on their
Yep.
side. They had to get rid of people that were showing signs that, there might be problems later on. Uh, it's a very high stress situation. And also the other problem is Nobunaga was a very smart guy. Now there's a lot of different opinions about how nice a person he was. He obviously wasn't that wonderful because being a daimyo, you had to be quite nasty sometimes, frankly. Uh, but he wasn't dumb. And you can imagine that if he thought this random foreigner had some kind of martial skills that could be a danger to himself, is he just going to bring a random foreigner close to him that could off him when he's in a unsuspecting moment? He's having tea, he's having a meal.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's there's multiple angles, but this is really uh, problematic to take that view. Yeah.
And I think one thing that actually does a very good job of kind of showing how things would work during that time period, or at least close to it, is Shogun, Clavel's Shogun, right?
I haven't watched it.
Even the remake, both the
Okay.
the old one
I,
and the
I
remake.
don't I didn't watch the remake. I don't
I
have time. I
I
don't watch.
look, as somebody who actually enjoys, you know, Japanese history, and even though Shogun is a fictionalized version of things for the most part, it does a very good job of trying to bring in historical elements into the fictionalized story that they're telling, right? And
Okay.
with Blackthorn being there as a foreigner, as you said, he goes through all sorts of hell as a foreigner to even get to the point where they're like, okay, you can stand next to me without me telling somebody to chop your head off, type of deal, right? And that's particularly why I enjoy it, is because it shows how in feudal Japan, what a foreigner would experience from a country that has no experience with foreigners outside of wherever they've already been, you know? And it's fiction, but that's one of those things where you can take it and be like, oh, I read this somewhere, and yeah, that tracks, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And
I
it
mean,
does.
as far as I know, that show never claims to be totally historically
No,
accurate anyway.
no, it doesn't. And then it
So,
wasn't even until people went and said, okay, well, this sort of resembles this thing or that thing or whatever, in which case they just took what they know of the time period and made their own story, which again, and you and I both agree, that's fine.
yeah,
Nobody
yeah,
is
that's
claiming this is fact. Nobody is saying these people existed. Nobody is saying they did this, that, or the other. And
look,
it's
I don't even have a problem with people making fiction about Yasuke.
yeah,
If that floats your boat, then go for it. Just say it's fiction. That's fine. People can enjoy that. Makes for an interesting story. Why not? Like, I don't have a problem with that. It can be very interesting. Yeah. But the problem is when people start saying, well, this is historically accurate. If I was saying Shaka Zulu was actually a Nordic white dude and this is historically accurate, that'd be very silly, and it would be exactly the same thing that's being done now.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say you're heading in that territory of the things you shouldn't say.
Yeah, but it's really silly. So if it's not right to do it to someone else's culture, then you shouldn't be offended when someone does it to you. But if you're offended when someone does it to your culture, then why are you doing it to other people? It's really very simple. Yeah.
Exactly. No,
I'm
I
I'm not I'm not very PC. I'm not very, sensitive to that kind of thing. But if the people from that place are telling you we don't like this or whatever, then it's probably a good idea to not do it as far as possible, right?
and I agree 100%, and that's why I don't understand when all of this discourse kicked off of even people like me. I don't live in Japan. I've never been to Japan. I have
You
a
should
I
do
know
it.
I should. I absolutely should. I might go the champagne socialist route and start milking my audience for money to go to Japan. For those of you that know who I'm
For
referencing,
research. For
yeah,
research.
research purposes. But even as an American, somebody who appreciates history, who appreciates cultures, there's a lot of red flags that went up, and it's like, man, don't do that. Please don't do that. you know? And I finally got an answer from somebody as to why it was acceptable over here is because in the West, in the US, you know, Asians as a whole are considered, white adjacent, right? So there's
Okay.
there's less empathy for anything Asian related because, they take a back seat to other cultural issues. And
I
as you
guess
put it, it's the hypocrisy and the double standard
right.
that's so mind-boggling to me.
Well,
Where
generally you see Asian cultures are low confrontation. So I guess people thought that they could just get away with it because they're not going to say something. Yeah.
well, that's exactly
Uh,
what happened here with when they tried that campaign of Stop Asian Hate over here in the US, and then it lasted all of a week because once people started looking at the statistics of who commits the most crime against Asians, then they were like, "Wait a minute. All right, we need to stop this because this is going to open a whole can of worms that we don't want to touch." And I feel like it's exactly what I said, and I am not I'm not a right winger by any means. I'm not a left winger. I'm a common sense winger. I'm one of those people that believes
they're
that,
a normal person
yeah,
like
yeah,
that to us, I guess. Yeah.
where we
Most of the people that have an issue with this are just very normal, everyday people. Look, there are racist people obviously that are using this as an excuse to go make horrible comments about black people, and that's obviously unacceptable, and they shouldn't be doing that at all. But for the most part, it's not actually that.
right,
And for the most part, it's Japanese people saying, "Could you be a little bit more sensitive?" Yeah.
yep,
But apparently, you have to scream and shout and break things before people listen. If you're nice and polite and you say we really don't like this, then it's like, well, you're racist. That's why you don't like it.
yeah, yeah, and I saw that happening to Moe-san whenever he was bringing stuff up where you had Westerners calling him a racist and everything else when he's going, well, I'm Japanese. What? I'm just saying how I feel. Like, why are you getting mad at me? Calling him Japanese LARPer and fake Japanese and all sorts of
It's
names.
it's funny because people they like to label everyone as a colonizer, but they're doing exactly what colonizers would do, which is say, well, your opinion of your culture isn't important because my my perceived opinion is better. So it's like
Yep,
that's exactly what a colonizer would do.
yep.
Look in the mirror.
And I
Uh,
and this is sort of an aside. Do you think that a lot of that? Um, I'm trying to figure out the politically correct way to say this. That a lot of that acceptance of Western behavior is starting to shift in Eastern countries like Korea and Japan, and where you
Well,
have
there's stuff now like Johnny Somali and all this kind
yeah,
of thing open people's mind to not every Westerner is a nice person. I think sometimes people have this very rosy opinion of Westerners, yeah, because they have a kind of a movie idea of Westerners if they haven't really interacted with them. So I think that the honeymoon period might be running out a little bit in regard to that because of so many actions. I hope that Korea and Japan follow suit and take China's example, frankly, and just deal swiftly with because China's was like, okay, you commit a crime. We don't care if you're a foreigner. Like,
you
we're
go to
just not
jail.
putting up with it. Yeah, go to jail. It's not a nice jail, and your family has to pay for you. It's like I wish they would just do that. Yeah. Uh, so yeah,
Well,
I think slowly some people are starting to wake up and say, oh, maybe this is not the best thing to be taking in every Western uh, idea. Part of Japan and Korea's success is they took the best parts of Western culture and adapted it to themselves, like industry, like innovation, uh, those fields. It doesn't mean they didn't have industry or innovation. It just means that they took the best, techniques and applied it to what they have. And I think that's very smart. That's that's why they've been so successful. And now they outdo the West in most of those things.
yeah,
So I think there's going to come a point where they're like, okay, maybe we should be doing like that again. Take the good parts and
and
not
leave the
not have
rest.
to not deal with all this other weird stuff that comes in. Yeah.
Yeah, oddly enough, one of my favorite quotes is from a late '80s, early '90s action movie of Big Trouble in Little China, where they're talking about Eastern religions, and he says, "Yeah, it's like your salad bar. We take what we want, and we leave the rest."
Close enough.
Yeah, but
It was catching up with you, but I have an appointment.
yeah, no,
So
that's. I think we
uh,
covered everything
yeah.
that I wanted to speak to you about, at least for this session.
Thank you.
It'd be great to talk
Thanks
to you
for
again.
having me on.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate your time.
No worries. We'll try and have a catch up sometime soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you for having me.
All
Take
right.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
All right. That was my call with Dr. Naude. And that's something that I've been trying to make happen for like a couple weeks now. He's a professor. He is very busy. And as an academic, I will absolutely do what I need to do to accommodate his schedule. Because when it comes to stuff like this, right? When it comes to actual historical discussions, you want to talk to the people that are in a position to give you an educated answer. You don't want to get your answers from people like Hassan or Destiny or Andrew Tate or whoever who might have like a cursory knowledge of whatever the topic is. No, you want to go to those that can give you factual information. There's no fluff. There's no exaggeration. There's no improvisation, right? It's just, here are the facts. Here's what we know, and that's it. And that's what I like. I don't like getting into a whole lot of, well, here's what I think, or what it might be, or what it is. No, just give me the facts. What do we know? And that's exactly what he did. That is exactly why I wanted to talk to him. Because as a linguistics professor, somebody who has looked at the text, he can go, all right, here's my translation. Here's what it says. This is what it means. And I think we accomplished that with the stream today. So, it was something I was excited for. I'm very happy to have spoken to him and very grateful that he took time out of his schedule to speak to me. And hopefully one of these days we can we can do another catch-up stream talking about, you know, related subjects, right? Because what's happening now, especially with Yasuke and this AI revisionist movement, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. So, thanks for watching, everybody. I know it's late. And until next time, read a book. Just read a book. If you're interested in a subject, find a book, read it, see what the experts have to say. Don't listen to some idiot on the internet that's